Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election, and I'll be looking at why I think Nikki Haley, as the title of this video suggests, is the best candidate for Republicans in 2024. Now, I want to preface this by saying I don't think Haley's going to win the nomination. I actually think that she has a very low chance of doing so, but she's done a couple of things over the course of the past 5-6 months that I think are interesting. The first is, this is, I think, the most important, especially if you consider what my expectations were in June or July. She's garnered pretty serious momentum. She's gaining in the polls. And is she really within striking distance of Trump? Not really. But she's shown that she has been able to grab national attention in a meaningful and in a good, productive way for her personal brand. So she's probably not going to win the GOP nomination. But I think even if she dropped out right now, I think she'd still be in a better position, just personally, politically, brand-wise, than what she was in when she entered the race. And she's actually done a pretty good job of not getting too into it with Trump. Obviously, Trump doesn't like her. She's running against him. She's one of his main opponents within this primary. But unlike someone like Chris Christie or even Ron DeSantis, Haley has not really been as combative. And I think that further down the line helps her if she wants to win over a national Republican electorate, because obviously Trump voters are, as we're seeing now, still in the majority. So Haley, I think Haley's smart because she knows that she cannot offend or alienate Trump voters to any extent if she has any future within the party. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Haley is really, to me, proven that she is a talented politician. And, when I say talented, I don't mean necessarily that I agree with their views, that I disagree. And I don't really mean effective legislatively. I'm not here to comment on what I think of Haley, her record as governor or whatnot, her politics. I'm here to comment on her electability. And I think when I say talented politician, I mean she's a good debater. I think she's charismatic. And I think that she's better at appealing to people than people give her credit for. So an example of this, I would say, again, you can look at the polls, but if you want to talk about momentum in general, to get momentum in an electorate like the United States, you have to really have some extent charisma, and you have to really be able to garner attention, and you have to really be able to get press, whether that's positive or negative. Donald Trump, when he was first on the scene in 2015 and 2016, a lot of the press he got was negative, but as they say, all press is good press. So I don't always agree with that. I'm sure there are types of bad press, this press you don't want to get. But I think in the case of Haley, she's doing a really good job of getting good press and getting more attention than I think that she was getting at the beginning of the election. So she's momentum. She's appealing to Republicans. And is she going to get the nomination in 2024? I doubt it. I think if you made me guess, probably less than a 2% chance we see Haley leading the ticket for the GOP barring something crazy. But here's what I will say. She's got a real future, and I think that today I want to talk a little bit about her electability-wise. So I'm going to fill out the states here. Biden is obviously going to take some states pretty safely. Not all of them are going to be by the same margin. Some of these will actually be fairly close, but we're going to give him the states that I think he would win just as the baseline. That gets him to 225. We'll give him 226. And then for the Republicans, obviously I have a list of different candidates up. Trump, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Haley are the top. They're the top four, really. You could throw in Chris Christie, but for all intents and purposes, he's not winning. So that's going to get them to 179. And then these states, obviously, the map by now. We have only really 8 competitive states at this point in time. So we're just going to characterize these as important states here because I do want to talk about them individually. And I think that there's not a single state where Trump really does better than Haley. And, there are exceptions to that potentially. I think maybe you can make the argument for a state like Wisconsin. We'll get to that later, though. I want to start with DeSantis and Ramaswamy because, for a starter, just kind of to make this video, because I don't want to spend 20 minutes on each candidate, I think Ramaswamy is universally the least electable Republican candidate. I think everyone agrees on that. Even if you support him, I think that he's clearly would be the worst candidate for Republicans to run. So I don't really want to talk about him. I'm going to have his name up here, and I'm going to mention him in passing, but there's not a single argument that I think anyone could make that he would be better than anyone else on this screen for the Republicans, whether that be Trump, DeSantis, or Haley in any of these 8 states. So he's out of the picture. Now, let's go over to other candidates. Ron DeSantis, I think you can make an argument for some states, maybe Georgia, maybe North Carolina, maybe Texas, not the Rust Belt, But I think the Sun Belt, kind of these 5 states in the South here, you could definitely make arguments for individually. And how he'd stack up to Trump, I think, is fair. I think actually maybe I could see DeSantis doing better than Trump in Georgia, North Carolina, maybe even Arizona. But I don't really think that it's worth talking about because I think Haley is better than both of them in all of these states. So DeSantis versus Trump, that's an interesting comparison. Let's talk about Haley, though. So, for starters here, Haley, to me, in the Sun Belt, she easily does better in North Carolina and Georgia than Trump and DeSantis. And like I said, Ramos doesn't really matter. I'll mention him briefly, but it's really Trump and DeSantis we're talking about here. And in these states, we're really going to see Republicans struggle if they run Trump in the suburbs. Now, Joe Biden's a flawed candidate. I don't want to spend too much time on him, but he's going to pose problems for the Democrats. It's really just two bad candidates electability-wise faced up against each other in 2024 if it's Trump versus Biden. Haley, I think, would do really, really well in areas in Georgia like North Fulton, where we saw Republicans in 2022 like Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger, who were both, known for not believing in the election denialism stuff. And that really helped them with suburban moderate voters who were not necessarily, in favor of that, I guess you could say. And so when you see, performance like that, where they did 8-10 points better than Herschel Walker in all these counties, even 15 to 20 points in some cases in these counties in the Atlanta metro area, that wouldn't apply fully to Haley. I don't think she'd do 20 points better than Trump in these areas, but I think she'd do meaningfully better. And in a state like Georgia, which is going to be very close no matter who it is, that matters a lot. I also think Haley would just do better in general because she's from the South. I know Trump's, his state of residence is Florida, but I think of him as more a New Yorker. I think someone like Haley being from neighboring South Carolina, that really helps her. She kind of, the South is conservative, and it's a very, specific brand of conservatism that Haley can definitely tap into. That helps her in Georgia. I think North Carolina is similar. She's obviously from the state's southern counterpart. And South Carolina, obviously, a lot more conservative than Georgia or North Carolina, but there are some similarities culture-wise. And I think when you look at how Haley could, I think, appeal to these voters, a lot of it comes down to, conservatism, but in a productive way. So what I mean, and obviously that could mean a lot of different things. In this case, what I mean by that is looking at how voters in the suburbs perceive each party. I think suburban voters are conservative overall. If you ask me to describe suburban voters' politics, like nationwide, especially in the South, but this would apply nationwide, I say they're moderately conservative. They're not Republicans. They're not Democrats. They're, they're in the middle. There's, they like to split their ticket. They like to vote for different parties. They're swing voters. That's why suburban voters are so important. But they are conservative. And if you give them a generic Republican versus a generic Democrat, I bet the majority of them are going to vote for that Republican. Nikki Haley, and by the way, Joe Biden is not a generic Democrat. He is more unpopular than the average Democrat is. Nikki Haley, to me, though, is a really, really strong Republican because she is more moderate, especially socially. She was one of the Republicans in the first debate to make a point about how she wasn't necessarily in favor of an outright ban on abortion, how she wasn't going to legislate it, actually, because she's, went, against Mike Pence and said, we don't have the votes for this. There's no point in us doing it, really. And so I think that helps her with moderate voters. I think it helps her that she's not really going to be a culture warrior like Ron DeSantis would, which is one of his drawbacks in the suburbs. So Haley has a cleaner record than both Trump with the election denialism and DeSantis with the culture war stuff. I think that helps her in both these two states. In Texas, you could say a similar thing about Dallas-Fort Worth. The one thing I would mention I think makes it a bit more complicated is Hispanic voters in the South and also in urban areas like Houston and San Antonio and Austin and Dallas to a lesser extent, but really in the southern part of the state where Hispanic voters are a bit more predominant, I guess you could say. And so Trump did really well with those voters in 2020. Trump really accomplished a lot in South Texas and in, urban areas like Houston specifically. He was able to get decent numbers out of Hispanic voters in those areas. That was what, really helped him stay afloat in Texas and win by upwards of 5%. I think Haley could do that. I definitely wouldn't be shocked if she did it, but there's a bit more, room for error. I think we know Trump would do well with those voters. He did well with them last time. Haley, would she? I think so. I think logically you would assume she would have to, but you don't know. Now, the upside for her is that I think she definitely does better, and, by a lot in the suburbs of Dallas. These are educated voters. They're wealthy. They are, in areas that are growing in population, getting more diverse. They're definitely a bit more socially liberal than you might expect, right? Like, if you went to Frisco or Plano or Fort Worth or Arlington, these cities outside of Dallas, Texas, 15 years ago, I think it would be about as red as you can imagine. But nowadays, it's a bit more diverse. You have more people of different races and ethnicities moving in. And this is more of a cultural thing, too. Politics, make no mistake, politics is as cultural as it is electoral. And so for that reason, I think you have to consider how how these voters who are living in more diverse spaces, who are more college educated than they were 15 years ago, are they going to be less receptive to Republicans in general? Absolutely. But someone like Nikki Haley, who, like I said, is a bit more socially liberal or socially moderate than DeSantis or Trump, I think that helps her. And I think it also helps that she wasn't on the big election denial train, like I said earlier. So in these 3 states, I think that helps. In Arizona, I'm going to say the same thing. She does better in areas north of Phoenix, wealthy. They're, I would say the Phoenix metro area is a bit less diverse in the suburbs than Dallas is or San Antonio is or Austin is. But there are still educated voters who were very conservative 15 years ago, are now kind of in the middle, who would prefer Haley, especially over someone like Trump or Ron DeSantis. Now, Nevada is the only Sunbelt state where I think that you could make an argument for the other candidates. Trump did really well with working class voters in Vegas in 2020, but it's not a very big state in general. There are a lot of votes in the suburbs of Vegas, like Henderson, Henderson, Paradise, NLV, North Las Vegas, and then, there's a bunch of towns outside of Vegas that are growing and are, kind of like Texas, decently diverse. I think that Haley would do well there, and that would probably be the ball game for her in Nevada. I think she'd win it against Biden. I also think that she'd do better than Trump in Washoe County, which is a bit more socially liberal. It's a lot younger. It's kind of, you have Tahoe over here. It's more skiing. It's a lot more college-educated voters with UNR there, and it's an area that I think Democrats are really gaining in because of the population growth and because more people are getting college degrees. But Haley, like I said, a bit more socially moderate, a bit less polarizing than someone like Trump or DeSantis. She does well there. So we've got 3 states left, and these are the tricky states because I think a lot of people really believe Trump does better in these 3 states than Haley. And I get the argument for that. And I actually think Wisconsin might be the one state where you might be right. So that state is the one I'm not going to talk about here because it is so close that if I made an argument one way, I'd have just as many points to say the other way. So that to me is the one state where I think, yeah, go ahead. If you think Trump's better than Haley, I don't really disagree with that very strongly. Michigan and Pennsylvania, though, these are states where I think we have to consider Haley a bit more or, hold her in a bit higher regard than I think the consensus holds her. We'll start with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, to me, is a lot less working class than people think. I think when people think Pennsylvania electorally, they imagine a lot of, blue-collar, Trump-voting, white voters who don't really have college degrees, who are more, working class, middle class. And that's definitely true. Like, there are a lot of working class parts of Pennsylvania, but the problem, I would say, for, that argument is that for every working class voter that's trending towards Republicans, there are, maybe 1.2, 1.3 voters in the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh suburbs, which are growing at a faster rate, mind you, that are trending towards Democrats. So, Republicans have a reasonably high ceiling or a reasonably high floor in Pennsylvania, but they have a very low ceiling until they win the suburbs back. So Haley obviously won't, revert the suburbs back. Like, again, I've been saying 15 years ago, the suburbs were red in states like Georgia, Texas, Arizona. Pennsylvania, the same thing. It's to a lesser extent because Pennsylvania, Philadelphia is obviously a lot more progressive in metro area than historically Phoenix or Dallas has been. But, when you look at how the counties, outside of Philadelphia, like Chester, Montgomery, and Bucks were voting, even 15 years ago, they were still redder. They weren't as red as the other state, as I just mentioned, but they were still more Republican. And I would definitely say that Haley would pose a threat to Democrats there because Democrats have been gaining. Chester County voted for Romney by 9 in 2012, Clinton by, I think, 8 in 2016, then Biden by 17 in 2020, then John Fetterman won it by 17, and Josh Spear won it by almost 30, if I recall correctly. So Haley, I think, is better there. It's mostly white, it's mostly educated, it's very wealthy. And again, these are voters who, aren't super progressive inherently, but they will vote for Democrats because they don't like GOP stances on abortion or gay marriage or, social issues that Republicans like DeSantis have championed, conservative stances on. And then in the case of Trump, he isn't as much of a culture warrior as DeSantis is, but he is definitely, he hurt himself, I think, irreparably. Did I say that right? I sometimes say words wrong, but he did a lot of damage to himself with the election denialism. I think that Haley having neither of those, pieces of baggage that really helps her. And then you go to Pittsburgh, which has always been pretty Democratic, but has in the past 3 years been really turning it up for Democrats. Allegheny County has been huge for Democrats. I think Haley does really well in those suburbs because unlike Philadelphia, Pittsburgh's a bit less urban than Philadelphia. It's a bit more spread out. The suburbs are a bit less dense. And you can see that on a map if you look, but just to kind of explain it here, the suburbs of Pittsburgh are a lot less, I wouldn't say a lot less, but they're a bit less college educated than those in Philadelphia, and they are a bit less urban feeling. And again, suburbs, calling, suburbs urban is ridiculous, but hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying because of the density argument. And that really helps Republicans have upside because if you look at how they did in elections they've done well, like in 2021 and in 2016, they did really well in Allegheny County. Even Pat Toomey, who won in 2016 his last Senate bid as a Republican, he didn't win Allegheny County because he lost Pittsburgh, obviously, but he did well enough outside of it to make up for a lot of those margins. So I think Haley'd have a lot of upside in an area like Pittsburgh, and that's mostly because it's kind of more sparse suburban than other areas, and I think that's an area where Republicans still have upside, like I just said. Sounding like a broken record. I don't want to, if I just keep talking, believe me, I can do it. I can keep talking about suburbs and whatnot, but it's going to get boring after a while. So I imagine she'd do well there. And then Michigan's the last one. Michigan, to me, I think Haley would do well in. Michigan has a lot of old conservatism that's kind of trending left in the Grand Rapids area, which, where Democrats won a House seat in 2022 for the first time in decades. And that was because Republicans ran, a candidate who was very, very on the right. He was in favor of election. He was didn't believe the election was fair. He didn't believe, abortion should have, I think, been legal in any cases. I could be wrong on that, but he was very, very right wing and very, very socially conservative, as well as being on the Trump election denialism kind of train. And that hurt him in the suburbs because, again, districts that are conservative aren't necessarily Republican. They aren't interchangeable. And they'll vote for Democrats if they feel the Democrat is closer to their ideological views than the Republican is. I think Trump would do really poorly, and the same goes for DeSantis, but to a lesser extent. But I think Trump in particular would crash and burn in Grand Rapids like he did in 2020. He became the first Republican to lose Kent County in decades, which is where Grand Rapids is. He lost it decisively. He'd lose it again. Haley wouldn't win it, I don't think, but I think she'd come close to doing so, and she'd really, hurt Democrats by, coming close. And so that's because, again, these white, more educated, classically conservative voters 15 years ago, but now kind of in the middle, I think she'd, sway more of them to vote for her than DeSantis or Trump would. And then, finally, outside Detroit, Oakland County, it's a collection of blue suburbs. Haley wouldn't win them, but she would really, close the gap because in almost every suburb, especially in the Midwest, which is, suburbs in the Midwest are mostly white, decently college educated, but they're not very diverse. Haley, I think, would do really well with a certain type of white voter there that doesn't like Trump, doesn't really like DeSantis, but would be open to voting for a Republican because maybe they don't like Biden, maybe they, want their taxes lowered, maybe they're still, social or fiscally conservative, and that voter is, not everyone in the suburbs. It's, kind of a stereotype, but there are some voters in the suburbs who are like that, who do feel conservative fiscally and do. Want to vote for a more moderate Republican, as they've done in the past for like Mitt Romney, for example. So Haley, I think, does well unambiguously in seven of these 8 states. I think Wisconsin is the one you can make an argument for either way. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know who you think would do better there. But for now, this is kind of my point here. Haley, I think, would win. I think she'd beat Biden. She'd probably win. I don't think she'd win Michigan, but I think she'd win the rest of these red states, and that would be a pretty decisive victory. And Democrats are lucky she won't be nominated because she would definitely be a problem for Biden. So thanks so much for watching. Again, let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all in the next one.